quick intro. Today, we have Walter Tran from CentroAssist. Walter has spent the past 13 years at Holocentric, and he leads CentroAssist, a business that removes the burden of compliance for NDIS and aged care providers, making him the perfect guy for today's discussion. In the Shift Care team, we've got Andrew and Ian, who will be helping out with the Q&A and any questions you may have. And then we've got myself, Rob, from the marketing team. So with all that said and done, I'll now hand over to Walter, who can get started with his presentation.
Yep, thanks for that, Rob. And welcome, everybody. Great to see such a good turnout onto the webinar. There was a few names, actually, that I recognized on that list, so a few people that we already know. Hopefully, we can see my screen. Rob, I take it?
We can.
Good. Okay, good. Right. So what I'll do, I'll have a bunch of slides just to talk through some things, and then, like Rob said, if you've got any questions, hit that into the Q&A, and we can round back to it. All right, so let's jump in. So for those guys who don't know us, CentroAssist, been around since 2018, around the compliance, I suppose, on the NDIS practice standards. You can see I've got a variety of customers across Australia, and obviously a lot of shared ones with Shift Care. So we've seen the introduction of it, obviously see the evolution of it, and also continue to monitor the evolution of it. We have quite a good dialogue with the auditors, so get to learn a lot about what's going on out and the challenges that you guys have. And so for today's agenda, a few things, obviously just talking about it, because look, I know in this audience, we probably have some providers that are newer, that this concept potentially might be new to them. And on the other spectrum, I'm sure we have providers who've been doing this from day dot and potentially looking for some insights, maybe some tips and tricks and best practice that I can share as well, that we've observed. So there's a bit of a gamut. So if the kind of background stuff might bore you, please hold on. We'll talk about, you know, the best practice stuff at the back end of this webinar. So why do we need internal audit? So what's on screen at the moment is actually verbatim from the NDIS practice standards, but you'll see I actually highlighted the word proportionate. Okay, so within the NDIS practice standards, it actually does call out that you need a program of internal audits, and then the disclaimer is it's proportionate to the size of your business. So it doesn't mean that you have to go get a piece of technology to do it. It just means that you have to have an approach on doing it that's relevant to the size that you are. Now, when you talk about the size that you are, think about this. You know, when you're running multiple sites, you know, then needing to audit multiple sites or locations, that's, you know, proportionate. Whereas if you're just a sole trader, potentially, you know, your audit might just be a tick and flick exercise because you've only got maybe 3 or 5 participants or whatever it is. Right? So it can vary, and it is subjective. There's no other guidance that I've been able to find anywhere through the commission or through the auditors about, you know, if there's a marry up between how many employees you have or how many sites you have. That isn't out there, unfortunately. If anything, it's probably trying to just indicate to show you that, hey, this is something that you can proactively do to demonstrate your adherence to this, instead of waiting for, you know, for the commission to tell you what to actually do. Now, similarly in aged care, again, I picked out the words out of the practice standards. Again, they just use some similar words to go, hey, you need to have an audit of some sort. When you dig into aged care, they've had it a while. I suppose the practice standards, that whole compliance regime has been there in aged care for a long time, and hence they're a little bit more mature. In practice, if you're running in a residential aged care facility, so not home care, you would have to demonstrate that you're auditing every 6 months, even across all of these things. So you can see, right, slightly immature industry versus aged care in NDIS. We've mentioned it. In aged care, it's mentioned, but underneath the covers, there's actually more timing to it. And I'll talk about potentially where the future might head to with this sort of stuff as well. Now, internal audits, though, is not just this, you know, you do the audit and you finish, because within these practice standards, it also mentions the words continuous improvement. And obviously as well, there's a big focus on evidence-informed practice. So the reason I've drawn out continuous improvement is because the internal audit is one thing. You're ticking off the fact that you want to do an internal audit and that you're doing it and you've got a program of approach. But really the reason for doing it is to also demonstrate this, that you're using evidence that you're collecting to improve your business. I think some people get too carried away, in trying to just tick all the check boxes in terms of the compliance need. There's another presentation that I do where I talk about, just the maturity of organizations and if you get compliant or you maintain compliance, it's supposed to save you money. Obviously, there's that risk avoidance, but it actually should save you money because you're saving your time rework and fixing things when they come up. And that's that next level of maturity that ultimately, this industry needs to kind of transition to, and hence why internal audit is a really good place to start if you're not already doing it, because it sets you up for that thinking around improvement. And similarly in aged care, they have the same sort of stuff, same wording even, right? Based on evidence, keywords exactly the same. Probably another comment later on about the similarities about these industries as well. A key point is you have to collect facts. I had a interaction with a relatively new provider recently who was asking me about the actual audit process and that experience. And you could tell they had a bit of trepidation around the process about not having everything in place. And I reflected that, when you're going to get audited, you got to do your homework and you want to present what you've done, right? It's not about just waiting to be able to answer the questions as positively as you can be live. It's not about that. It's about how prepared you are for that. And hence, again, internal audit is a mechanism to get you into doing that regularly instead of waiting for those audits to come up, either the midterm or the beginning or the recertification one that, a lot of I think the New South Wales organizations are being faced with shortly. So what about the actual external audit, right? So hopefully in this audience, you guys all either registered providers or are familiar with this. With NDIS, you pick a bunch of registration groups, and then depending on these registration groups that you pick, that will trigger what you're going to get audited against, right? And that's what the external auditor needs to actually check you for. Now, I think at last count, there's something like 15 of these guys across Australia that have been certified by the Commission to actually check you off. But if you look at the work that they actually do, and this was sourced from some of the audit reports that we've been shared, and even some of the interaction that we've had with auditors, where they've been able to educate us on what they actually do. They check you off on something between 125 things that they have to check off on. It's about 292. So 292 is if you provided all these registration groups and all these modules, right? So clearly that's a rarity, but even 125 things that they're checking off. Now, the question then begs is, if they're going to do it, what should you do in preparation, right? And this is an obvious answer. If that's what they're going to check you off on, why don't you actually practice doing that more regularly and not only just get them up to scratch, but actually show improvement. The other thing to mention as well, when they do audit, the external auditor comes either, do a desktop audit or a face-to-face audit, there are some other things that they are picking up, right? So if you've had any corrective actions from the previous audits, they're going to be looking at that. And then there's a subjective line in there that they can be directed by the Commission to look at anything in specific in more detail. So for whatever reason, right? So maybe you've had a bunch of incidents that you've raised and they're concerned about, they can get the auditor to actually focus in and hone in on that a bit more than what a normal audit would do. And then in terms of timing, the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission has changed this over the time, but if you're going through certification, which I assume most larger providers are, you have what they call a midterm audit, right? So 18 months in between, you have a midterm audit where they just check off on things, especially if you haven't practiced it at the beginning, they're going to do that again. And during COVID, you guys would have seen it was predominantly a lot of desktop because we couldn't do face-to-face, but that face-to-face is the standard to come and actually go talk to your participants and talk to your staff. And it's interesting, and I'll touch on this in a second, but this is a bit of a hint. When the auditor comes to audit you, they're going to interview your staff, right? And when we're talking about internal audits, then that's a bit of a hint, right? To make sure that your staff aren't only just up to date, but across and maybe even participate in some of your auditing activity, right? So if you take a step back, for me, an internal audit should correlate directly with what happens on the external audit and some, okay? I'll show you a screen in a second, but, there are other things that you're doing as a business, which is actually going to be good practice and it even saves you money, that potentially you want to audit against and check off on. An example, I think one of my colleagues and I, Kat, were talking to a provider just this morning, where something simple like the Band-Aids, being expired on first aid kits. That might be something that you put an audit around or you wrap around to make sure that you check that it's up to date. And it just makes sure that the quality of the business is sound, right? And ultimately the experience of the people that either work with you or work for you or that you're providing services to, right? Imagine just the education and how staff will actually project the quality that you guys actually uphold within your business if they were involved in the actual internal audit process. Right, so at a high level, what's the approach of conducting an internal audit? Right, so I've got some basic 5 stages here, and I've got some screens in a bit more detail, but I'll just touch on this first. So, before just jumping off and doing an audit, there's a few questions that you want to ask yourself. What should we audit? As leaders of business, I always call out CEOs and leaders of business and say, you actually know what your gaps are. You guys know. If a CEO comes to me and says, "Oh, I don't know where my gaps are," I'd be like, "No, that's a lie. Those are the things that keep you up at night." And that should actually drive potentially how you prioritize some of your audits that you do, right? So pick the areas that keep you up at night that you already know are obvious areas, and why, right? Because ultimately you want to get on top of it. The other one is location. Especially for multi-sites, there are some audits that potentially you could do at the organizational level, but there are some audits that potentially you might want to do actually and repeat them at every site that you have, right? And then the next one's interesting. Even planning who will be involved. It's quite an interesting dynamic in the market that we're in, where we have sole traders who might just be working for themselves to people who've got hundreds of employees, right? But as soon as you start to have employees on your books, part-time or casual, there's actually an opportunity to bring them and involve them in this process. So it doesn't become a top-down activity driven from the CEO or the general manager. It's something that's actually shared across your business, right? So that's something to think about even at the very beginning. And then in terms of schedule, one of the kind of sad things that happens in our industry, we probably see it more than the shift care guys do, but we get a lot of people come to us when they're just about to hit their audits. It's improved, by the way, so that's a bit of a disclaimer. We've had people now come to us and start talking to us way in advance, knowing that they don't want to go through the same pain that they did during the certification process. And I have a little graph to explain this in a second, but what you want to be able to do, you got to provide the time to actually conduct the audit, collect the evidence, and then report back on it. So it's a very sane thing to try to schedule around that and have a program, which is actually what the practice standards are actually asking you to do. To actually have a program about this. It's not just have an activity around it, or don't just do it before the auditor shows up, right? It's not about just scrambling at the last minute. What you're trying to do is show and demonstrate that you're running a quality practice. And again, I've got a slide at the end that'll hopefully kind of drive that home a little bit more. The other part of schedule too, it's interesting. We get, even in our space, we get a decent amount of calls in January. People are just starting to ramp up their work again, and they've got time to think about quality. But if you think about audits, you want to time them so you actually have time to run them. There's no use in trying to schedule something and knowing that you won't have the time, right? So for whatever business, think about what's happening in your business, or something like trying to schedule audits around April, right? Certain types of audits around April that you might need to interact with your staff. Guess what? People are going to be away for Easter, right? April is like half a month sometimes in certain businesses, right? So taking that into account when you're scheduling it. And then when you actually do it, you want to assess how you did. Now, you want to be able to use some sort of scoring, right? how many checkboxes, so maybe how many ticks, how many things were compliant, how many things weren't compliant, and then compare how you went. One of the things that people forget when they're thinking about audits is, oh, we just got to do it. Well, hang on, if you actually have quality as something as a focal point with you in your business, you would actually compare about how you went last time. And ultimately, what you're trying to demonstrate, especially to the auditors and to the commission, is that you're constantly thinking about how to improve your business. And also that if it has gone backwards, you know why it's gone backwards, right? So assessing so something like, just keeping score of how you went is actually very important. It might seem like, maybe it's a way to give you some sort of competitive edge, or maybe you have different teams that use a scoring method, and that's true. If you have two locations and you get them to audit each other and create some healthy competition, that's a great thing to have. But ultimately, it's for you to compare how your business is tracking over time, right? So very important there. And then the evidence. Some people find the collection of evidence really challenging because they might be sole traders and they're actually doing the service and they know their heart's in the right place. So when they're doing it with the right practices. But the auditors don't, piggyback with you during those services every day. So they can't see it. They can't feel it. You might think that you might be able to convince them in an interview when they come and question you. But ultimately, you got to demonstrate evidence. Now, I think the important part of collecting for evidence, though, is not just to collect the evidence for when you have got gaps, but even for stuff that you think that you've got a 3, right? Or not a 3, but you've demonstrated that you've actually compliant. You want to be able to demonstrate every one of those things actually back to an auditor, right? Instead of just verbalizing it. So it's very important to collect evidence. And then after you've collected evidence and you package it all up, that's when you go into improvement mode. And you see in this process, we've got it in a cycle, I suppose, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Like you do the audit, you find things that you want to improve, and you put plans in place to actually improve those things, and then come around, do the same audit in 6 months or 12 months time, or whatever your timing is going to be. You want to check off that those improvements have been delivered. If not, obviously get on top of those improvements, but use that to drive improvement within your business, right? So the review and improve is really important, and that should actually spawn off its own activity, right? That should spawn off your continuous improvement activity. And one of the interesting things you'll find, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this, when you engage your team around the improvements, it's actually a very positive, energy driving activity across your business. Because I'm sure if you've got colleagues like me, when you identify things that could be improved and you kind of rally around it, you get them done, get them planned, you get them improved, and then we all feel great when we've achieved those things, right? So it's not to be undersold at all, right? For me, continuous improvement, internal audit come hand in hand. You do them together. It's not just about ticking the box for internal audit. All right, let me kind of just go deeper, just show you guys some examples of what I just spoke about, right? So, when it comes to audits, what you want to do from the NDIS perspective anyway is try to audit against the standard, right? So you can see here, I've got a screenshot of potentially some audits around the core module around the NDIS, right? And then potentially some operational ones, things like medication, participant files, general cleaning, if you guys are running that, right? Having these buckets of audits that you can actually identify and align back to either the practice standards or a business area that you have, right? I mentioned it as well before, right? To actually have operational audits would actually demonstrate good practice. Just because the NDIS auditors are just going to focus on the practice standards doesn't mean that they won't be impressed with the fact that you actually have your house in order, that you've got audits around, things like cleaning, right? First aid kits, that sort of stuff, right? So it's actually quite a good thing to do. And then I mentioned this before around just doing the audit. And if you remember back at one of the early slides I put up, I said that the NDIS itself, the practice standards, just the core module, has 125 things that you should check off against. Now, each one of those, you could say yes, no, and give it a score pretty quickly. But to collect the evidence, to kind of give your assessment, your true assessment on how you're doing on that business, is going to take a decent amount of time. Right? It's probably going to cost days of effort. Right, so spacing them out and kind of scheduling them not only gives you time to do them, but demonstrates that you're thinking about it all year round. It isn't just an activity you do because the audit is coming next week, right? It's something that you actually have ongoing all the time. And then evidence and improvement. What you want to be able to do, and I see a lot of people do this. This is a screenshot from our system, right, where you can actually upload it all in one place. But a lot of organizations just set up drives on SharePoint or Dropbox or whatever it is to store and collect all that evidence. Right? While you're doing those checks and balances, as you're finding things, you want to store a copy of it, so you're able to kind of present that to the auditor when they ask for it. Now, some auditors we've seen don't care about it at all. As soon as they see you're collecting files, they already go, "What, sweet?" A bit more blasé because you've been able to demonstrate that you actually have taken it seriously. Where we've seen some auditors actually dumpster dive that and go into every little piece of detail that you have just to check you off, right? And then what's important when you're doing an audit is to actually have that recommendation and identify some actions that you want to do. Right. So again, here's a screenshot from our system where you want to put in a recommendation of potentially what you found based on the score that you might have, and if you found any non-conformities, to actually work on that beforehand, and then ultimately to identify or spawn off continuous improvement things that the business might be able to do. So you can see here in this one, I've got, I think this was a audit around, I think, facilities, right? And I've actually then identified, hey, potentially we should do something about our signage, right? And again, it's demonstrable. I've got it. I've got it in a system, or I've got it in some documented form, and I've also documented what I'm going to do about what I've actually found, right? So, and again, even though I'm showing you, example screenshots of a system, you can effectively do this, on paper, right? Because people were doing this on paper for many, many years, right? So you don't necessarily need something that's system driven, because proportionality wise, you might just be a sole trader. You can get away with just collecting evidence in a big folder. 2 more slides to go. I just want to, again, just repeat some best practices. Planning ahead, I think I've made this point 2 or 3 times now. Planning ahead and spreading them out, and the graphic on the right-hand side, just to show you, with a midterm audit and audit, the amount of scrambling that we've seen the industry undertake sometimes is crazy. And I'm sure you guys aren't just cruising through your days. When you've even though you've planned when the auditor might come, it doesn't mean that you can stop all your services at that point just to do the audit. So you can imagine it's a very stressful time for the business, not just for the business leaders, but for the business. And hence, spreading them out for yourself to kind of chip away at it over during the year is a way better approach and way less business disruption than trying to cram it all in at the very end, right? The other one, actually enough, when I was looking into some of the questions that we got asked around this, I used to get asked, okay, when should you do an audit? When should you do it? And one of the things is potentially to react to some trends that you might be observing, right? Maybe you've been getting some certain types of incidents that might be flagging, certain things happening, or maybe you have had an influx of new employees, and you want to use the internal audit mechanism as a way to educate them on how we uphold quality within your business, right? So it's not necessarily something that you got to go, I do the financial audit before the end of year, I do blah, blah, blah. Now, you can do that if you want, but also be open to the fact that you want to be able to respond as things are happening within your business and actually triggering it. I think for a lot of businesses, if you can change your mindset to going, an internal audit is actually a good thing to set up our business for good practice into the future, that will get you more comfortable in actually creating audit activity, right? Because you want to find out stuff, potentially use the audit to dig deeper as well, right? Mentioned keeping score, especially for those ones with multi-sites. There are a certain number of people in the population that are really competitive, and competition is a good thing when it comes to quality. Can be a motivator to actually drive improvement. For the larger providers out there that are ShiftGear customers, if you've got multiple sites, multiple locations, having a scorecard and data on how people have actually progressed with the audits, you'd be amazed in how to see how they react to that, right? Because it's such a positive thing. If you set it to go, hey, this is something that we're using to improve our business, it's actually a great motivator, right? I mentioned this before, when you're small, obviously you can't spread the load, but, as you've got more people around your business, house leaders or team leaders, or even people who are responsible for a certain location, they should be able to be the ones that are championing the cause for internal audits and actually carrying them out even for you, right? So it shouldn't be just all top down, driven from the top, bringing somebody that's just doing auditing to do it. If you do that, you're going to change the way that it's actually going to be portrayed within the business. But if you spread the load and it's something that they're proud of, you're going to change the culture and change the view on how people look at these things. And then the last one, you got to collate improvements and plan the actions. I think that's the tail end of it. Some people think just do the audit. Here's all my evidence. I'm done. For me, that's just half of it, right? Do that, but actually plan your contingent improvement and actually plan them out and actually execute against them and update them, keep them up to date as you're doing them. And then the last slide, I thought I'd put just a slide here just to show you guys the future of where this might be headed, and especially around compliance for NDIS providers. So I'm sure some of you guys are home care providers as well. We do see a lot of that. On the left-hand side is actually the star rating system that aged care put in recently, right? So as an aged care provider now, you'll actually have your ratings scored, as you're getting audited, actually published online. Now, I'm not sure about you, but if I was a customer, if you didn't rate, just looking at the scores here, if you didn't rate 3 or above, there's no chance I'm going to offer the, actually engage you in services, right? So this quality aspect of your business is going to impact more than you've actually seen in the past, where it was kind of behind the scenes, it wasn't published. In the future, from what we can gather, it's going to be heading that way, right? You want to be proud of it. It should be something that you're proactive with. And for us, that's, instantly then a reason to drive internal audits into your business if you're not doing that already. And then on the right-hand side, and a whole other debate, if anybody wants to have a chat about this, in the UK, the UK's probably got the most similar kind of approach to disability care that we have in Australia. Now, when I say similar, I'm not saying anywhere close to the NDIS, but at least some of their practices are similar, person-centered and that sort of stuff is part of their language. But what they do in the UK is they actually it's all gobbled up together, called adult social care. So they don't separate NDIS with aged care. They don't have that weird separation that we have, right? Where you get the 65 and then we throw them over to aged care. They don't have that in the UK. It's all part of one system and even the same provider. And interestingly, you can see they don't use the STAR method, but they've got these quality indicators that you actually get rated against. And similarly, it's published online, it's all visible, right? So I thought I'll share that with you just to leave you with that. If you guys have been running audits and everything that I've told you to date makes sense and you're doing it, keep it up. But I think the way that the industry is going and the need for visibility, I think if you're not doing it today, consider thinking about doing it, and obviously get the right systems and program in place to be proportionate to the size of your business. All right, let me stop there, take a breather, hand it back to Andrew.
Thanks, Walter. That was awesome, mate. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please, you can either ask in the question and answer button on the Zoom toolbar there. If anyone would like to speak to Walter, there's a raise hand button in the Zoom toolbar as well. So Faylene has a question by the looks. Sorry, Faylene, you've disappeared.
Andrew and Faylene, do you want to allow?
I think she's taken her hand down, so she might have just been testing the button, I think. Walter, how often would a company be audited by the NDIS? Is it a regular thing, or is it something that they get notified about prior, or do they just sort of rock up?
Yeah, well, obviously, when we're talking about the external audits, right? It's a 3-year program, and you get externally audited, every 18 months. Right. So that's part of the cycle that you have. Just related to that question, then how often should you audit yourself, right? If the external auditor is going to hit you every 18 months, when should you do it? In actual fairness, right? doing it at the last minute, once every 18 months, yeah, you'll probably get the tick, right? But, hopefully you guys have been hearing through this presentation, it's not about just getting the tick. It should drive efficiencies within your business, and doing it more regular is actually good practice. And as I was saying before, in aged care, when we're running, residential aged care homes, they got to do it every 6 months. It's actually legally, it's actually stipulated by the Aged Care Commission to actually do that every 6 months. So anything between 6 to 12 months is okay. Don't just do it every 18 months, just as you're getting audited.
Yeah, good advice. Christy has asked, we could see you using an automated system. Is there one you can recommend that a provider could purchase to use the templates?
Is that for a second I thought it was one of my team. Like obviously in the screenshots that I showed you today, that's actually the CentroAssist internal audit system. So if you guys want to have a closer look at that or a demonstration of it, just reach out to us on our website, centroassist.com.au, and just put in the form submission. Or I'm sure Andrew and the team would love to refer them to us as well. But you can contact us direct and get a look at that.
Fantastic. Faylene, your mic should be able to work now. If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask a question.
Thanks, mate. Can you hear me now?
We can. Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Sorry.
That's all right.
I just know that because we're regional, many of our audits external are desktop.
Mm-hmm.
So, they ring and do the whole walk around with a tablet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just conscious we're using SharePoint as our file saver, and conscious that also there'll be need for the auditor to look at, I suppose, our rostering and our client notes and all that, which we put through ShiftCare.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering how we go around, probably asking the ShiftCare guys, how we go about auditors getting access to that without giving them total access for, clients that haven't consented and all the rest of it. Maybe Walter's had some experience in this. Thank you. That's the end of me.
Thanks, Faylene.
Yeah, ShiftCare guys, you want to go first, and then I'll answer it from my perspective.
Sure. Look, access to ShiftCare, it is a tricky thing because there's a lot of information in there. It would depend on what the auditor's requirements were, and we do get a lot of questions from customers asking for information for audits. So ShiftCare will give you the ability to download event reports and shift data, client details and things like that. So you can actually put them into an exportable file from ShiftCare to provide those to the auditors as required. I don't think I know of any customer that's actually given an auditor direct access via a login into the system. I don't think that's generally necessary. The auditors will normally ask for a specific amount of information, and our support team and our customer success team can help you get that data out of ShiftCare. If it's a lot of data, sometimes there's a limitation on the amount of data you can download from ShiftCare at a time. If you need to go back a year or two, we can put in a job request to our engineering department to pull down as much data as you need within ShiftCare for audit purposes.
Yep. And then more generally, the auditors, from what I understand, they just want samples of some of these things, right? So they're not necessarily trying to go through everything that you have. So and I suppose that's why, the team haven't been requested to go do a full dump of everything, every piece of data in there. That would be tens of thousands of pages of data, right? I'm assuming, Andrew, like you would have to export everything out. But even on the audit side, we've seen people, especially with SharePoint, you can, depending on what package you have, you might be able to share the folder or create a Dropbox folder to dump the stuff in there to share with them. With our system, you can actually invite them to the system, and with our quality management system, it's a little bit different to ShiftCare, right? You don't have everybody's notes and all that personal identifiable information there. It's a quality information system, so you've actually just got your audits in there. So it's actually quite good practice, and because you're remote, to be honest, that's how you have to do it, because they're not going to rock up and get access to your premises and do it. So you have to be able to provide this stuff digitally and remotely, which is where using a system like the one that I showed you in the screenshots actually makes it easier. We find that some of our customers, in planning for the audit, actually just invites the auditor, so the auditor can do all that work without coming in and interrupting you doing your providing services and just asking you mundane questions that you already go, hey, it's all there, go do your work. Right? So hopefully that's answered it.
Thanks. Maylene said that's good info. So thanks, Walter. Awesome. Ruth has asked, what do you think of getting an external auditor? And if so, I don't know if you can make recommendations here, but
it's interesting. If you guys don't know about, the external auditing space, remember when I'm talking about the external audit, I'm talking about the official audit that you have to do for NDIS compliance, right? I'm not talking about any other random auditor that you might want to bring in. We've run into some businesses that go, you know what, I don't want to do my own internal audit. I'll just pay like an accountancy firm or somebody else to come and audit me, like you do your books, right? I've seen some of them do that. In terms of the external auditors that are auditing you for the NDIS practice standards, right? Like I said, there's about 15 of them. One of the data points for you guys is that all of them will claim that they can service your region. Because what happens in this market is they actually do use a lot of subcontractors depending on where you are. And so you might pick an organization that you love the brand, you love the sales pitch, and then they just end up getting the subby that would have been from the other brand to actually audit you anyway. To be honest though, if I kind of unpeel that question a little bit, guys, here's the advice based on what we've seen in talking to the auditors and actually talking to providers after the fact. If you do your homework, like conduct internal audits, like if you do your homework and you've read all your stuff, you're going to have a good experience with the auditor. It's like, if I can kind of hop back, guys, when you're at school and you haven't done your homework, and then the teacher nails you on a question, they know you don't know they know you don't know the answer, right? But if you did your homework, you're snappy at it, your body language is completely different. They're going to be impressed by how much you know, right? So it's not about picking the right auditor here. It's about actually doing what you need to do as a provider to be on top of it and to present like you actually keep quality in the top of your mind.
Great, thanks, Walter. Bojin, hi Bojin. We are an unregistered NDIS service provider. Do the NDIA audit unregistered service providers? Yeah,
you're lucky there, right? So officially, there's no audits for unregistered providers. You can keep on doing what you're doing. With unregistered providers, the only thing that you're upheld against is the code of conduct, which is like a professional code of conduct with 5 or 6 things that you just need to uphold. It does mean though, just one of the little things that people don't know, as an unregistered provider, the NDIS Commission can still go after you if you screw up. So if you have an incident that you haven't reported or you haven't dealt with it a certain way, the NDIS Commission still has authority over you to actually follow up with you, even though you're unregistered, right? That's actually written in law. So even though you don't have that overhead of needing to be audited, again, I would challenge anybody who's running a business, who's looking at the future of their business, to actually not have some sort of program to actually do internal audits. I think that's a very healthy thing to do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Walter. Sue, I'll get back to you on that question around exporting client reports from ShiftCare. I don't think Walter can help you with that. Anika has asked, so what is the benefit of being registered in that case?
Yeah, that is a very hot topic, isn't it, guys? Like, obviously, you guys know being registered means that you can deliver services to a broader set of the market. You aren't just self-managed, right? There's not a right, wrong answer for anybody. You got to evaluate the opportunity cost or the opportunity that you have in hand, potentially in your geography. That's a bit different. And then the cost of actually getting registered. I hear constant debates either way. I would challenge people who think that if they're running a larger business and they don't believe registration is a good practice, going through the registration process and getting audited is actually a very healthy thing. It makes sure that if you've got potential gaps that you might have in your business, either in the way that you deliver services to the way that you govern your business. And, if some of you guys have been reading those reports out of the Royal Commission, they're really tough reads. It just tells you that those businesses weren't run the right way, didn't have the governance structures in place, right? So it's actually a healthy thing to get registered. Going through the process is healthy. But then from a financial standpoint, yeah, that's an argument based on where you are, how much you're going to put into it, what sort of clientele you have, right? So that's a constant debate. I don't think we'll ever have the right answer for that one. But it's unique to your situation.
Fantastic. Davidson's asked if you've got any advice to prepare for an audit if you're a new business but not yet operational.
Go on. That's a really good question, man, and we see that a lot. when you're not operational, it's really hard to audit you on anything, right? If you think about it, you know, they'll go, hey, show me how you would raise an incident. Well, I haven't started yet. How am I supposed to show you that I've got an incident that I've raised? In that regard, you know, you have to demonstrate your understanding of your policies and procedures and how you are going to operate, right? Remember, when you haven't practiced what you want to register for, the auditors will come back at a certain stage to actually check off that you actually have operated. So even though at the beginning they're not going to be able to check too much, they will have to come back anyway after you've actually started delivering services. So you'll have to demonstrate at some point. But at the very beginning, you know, it's back to the same point I'm making. Do your homework. You know, I know some of you guys know who CentroAssist is. You know, our lower grade customers get policies and procedures in a portal from us. And I repeat it like a broken record. I go, look, you've got the standard policies and procedures that we've written really short and sharp for you, but you got to read it. You got to read it, you got to understand it, and you got to demonstrate that you know it and understand it, because that's what the auditor is going to look for, right? Your auditor wants to make sure that you're going to deliver practices in line with the regulations. So being able to demonstrate that and doing your homework is the only way, in my view anyway, of, you know, going through that auditing process smoothly.
Great, thanks, Walter. Xavier is ready for their first audit, and without just relying on the scope of audit, do providers have other resources they can use to get ready for auditing? Yeah,
look, out there commonly, no, but I would challenge this, to be honest. If you've already picked the auditor, so as in the external auditor, if you've actually picked the external auditor, I would challenge them to ask for what they're going to check for, their checklist, because they present it to you afterwards anyway, right? So after they audit you, they'll give you a checklist of stuff and go, hey, this is what I found, this is where the non-compliances are. So they could actually provide that to you ahead of time so you can prepare better. Now, some I think will be comfortable in doing that. Some of them might not, you know, if they buy the book, they might go, hey, we don't do that. We don't give it to you until after. You know, we want to surprise you. We don't want to tell you exactly what we're checking. But it kind of sounds silly to me, right? It's checking off the practice standards. We've seen some of the auditors okay with that because you've already paid your money. It's not like you sign up a contract and you're going to take that you know, audit checklist and run off and not go through the service with them, right? So they're potentially just trying to safeguard their commercial needs there. But that would be my suggestion because there's nothing really out there publicly anyway, from what I've seen, where you can get a pre-audit checklist. To be honest, that's an idea for us. Maybe we come up with a pre-audit checklist and we'll pop that out there. So maybe I'll take that one offline. Walter, thank you so much for joining us and for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure our customers and those who attended today got a lot out of this session. Thanks, everybody. Really enjoyed it.